Perfect. Okay, so basically how this started is Visda, Areti, Hiroko, and I have known each other for a while from ICAD. This was an ICAD gathering, um, and we ended up getting in touch. I think Visda initiated this. I want to give you credit, Visda here, or Visda and Areti initiated this because, of course, when the pandemic hit, we all had to do this. And if you haven't seen this beautiful horse drawing, I you're welcome. Basically, the semester begins, suddenly everything goes into quarantine, we rush make teaching plans, and this is the actual teaching down here, this like sad little foot. So the motivation for the study was a way to document pandemic teaching and particularly document our different experiences because we were set in Greece, Canada, the US, and Japan, respectively. And we wanted to compare pandemic teaching experiences across the globe. From the perspective of all of us include some sort of ear training and listening training exercises. We include some field recording from the natural environment. We have assignments that have to do with measurements of space and place. And all of those things were massively impacted because of the pandemic, of course. So from listening to the pandemic to working with sound with various technological equipment limitations, we wanted to kind of keep chatting and comparing. So we've been meeting for almost a year periodically and talking about our various challenges, advantages, opportunities, impressions, and coordinating. We've been coordinating two main kind of areas. A survey, a questionnaire that was created by Visda. And the survey was then given out by myself as well in English, and also it was translated and given out in Greece and Japan as well. And so we at this point have more than 185 responses. There's really more that haven't been translated yet. We're kind of mid data collection and data analysis. We also worked on a number of coordinated assignments, which was quite the feat, I would say, given that, in the next slide, I'll explain that we're quite in different disciplines. But we tried to coordinate several assignments, a pre and post questionnaire for a sound walk assignment, instructions for measurement of decibels and making comparisons. Two of us coordinated a room acoustics assignment, and another two of us coordinated a sort of composing with field recordings assignment as well. So just to give more of an overview of the whole background of this study, the teaching sites were, as I mentioned, Japan, Canada, US, and Greece. There were some hybrid courses, actually, since the start of the pandemic in March 2020. In the following semester, some of us had some hybrid courses. We had some in-person instruction. Courses range from 12 to 70 students. We'll get some of the more finer grain details a little bit further in the presentation. Apologies, it's under 8 o'clock this morning in Pacific time, so I have to drink coffee. And the courses were at graduate, but mostly undergraduate level. And the important part is, I believe Visda and Areti both are in sort of departments of music technology, but I'm in the School of Communication, and Hiroko is in Information Media Studies. So the topics range, as you can imagine, really widely. Acoustics, speech communication, topics are the courses that we're teaching, and thus the approaches that we have to apply during the pandemic. acoustics, speech communication, room and outdoor acoustics, audio synthesis and programming, music technology, performance as well, soundscape studies, urban sound. Both me and Visda actually have a course that is explicitly about listening to the city or soundscape and urban space, which was really interesting during the pandemic. So the research question that we kind of formulated at the onset was how much, it was based on our informal observations. We kind of came together with this idea of what we've already observed. So how much can it be inferred about the impact of the pandemic on students' everyday life and learning? How much are pandemic-related themes coming up in students' assignments? Are students making novel observations directly related to COVID measures or new social norms? And how has the pandemic and COVID safety measures changed the experience of sound walking? What can student experiences tell us, basically? And further, for technical and audio production courses, we asked what sorts of core skills or knowledge are impossible to convey online. How are students functioning with limitations? What are students struggling with in online learning? And what are they excelling in online learning? So a lot of the quantitative survey that Areti is going to present in a moment has to do with these last few questions. How students are dealing with online learning and what sort of technical and life-based challenges they have. Okay, and with that, I will turn this over to Areti.
Yes, good afternoon from Greece. Let's give a preliminary overview of the questionnaire that we handed out. As Milena mentioned, a single questionnaire, 13 questions. Some of them were open text questions, so these require and further analysis are not so easy to analyze automatically. And for the cases of myself and Hiroko, also translation in English to be able to run comparisons. 13 questions. I will present results here from 5 or 6 of them. Roughly 185 plus responses. The plus comes from the fact that I was the only one so far who collected some responses from graduate students, so these are not included in this questionnaire. And we're also still collecting data from Hiroko from Japan, because their semester is kind of more shifted toward the summer than for the rest of us. The pandemic hit us at some point in March, so spring semester 2020. We started having this discussion. The questionnaire was handed to all our students twice, once towards the end of the fall semester of 2020, and one a few weeks ago towards the end of the spring 2021 semester. So undergraduate courses only, and we will only be analyzing the countries of US, Canada, and Greece. Japan is still under data collection. So what will we try to look at with this preliminary analysis here? We want to see how was this change for the students. Most of us are instructions or graduate or PhD students. We're not in undergrad life. We know how we experienced the quarantine, what it did to our research and our work, but how was that change for the students? How, of course, if and how it affected their learning experience. What strategies, if any, did they have to employ to survive the 2.5 semesters of COVID-19 quarantine? And interestingly enough, how do they envision their post-pandemic learning experience? So I'll be presenting you some rough statistics. Can we go to the next slide, please? So the first question we're going to look at is, how do you feel, the question was, do you feel that the distant learning approach has impacted your learning? And we see the yeses in blue and the no's in red for the 3 countries. And we see that students are in agreement. It has impacted their learning. And in the USA, the students were really, really strongly opinionated about that. 80% of the students says it has. Now the question is how? So can we move on to see how? One more click. Let's see the positive how. So if we look at the analysis globally, we see that 72.4% of the students, 72+% of the students said it has impacted. And the positive feedback they gave us was, it was different, but it was a good experience. A lot of people, quite a lot actually, reported that this experience helped them become independent learners. In other words, it was clear to them that they had to rely on their own powers. Interestingly enough, and contrary to my personal experience and to the experience of the rest of our panelists here, some students reported that it was easier to disconnect from work. Contrary, again, to our experience, for me, it was much harder to disconnect from work. We were working throughout the day. A lot of students were happy because they didn't have to commute to work. And that's understandable. And hence, they had more time to work on things, on assignments. If we move on, let's see some of the negative comments that we got. A lot of students reported that they experienced a lack of motivation. It was much harder to actually do work, to be motivated to wake up and participate in a class every morning through Zoom. And the vast majority of the people at some point in their text mentioned that even if it was good, even if it was bad, we have to admit that it was hard for us to focus. A lot of people experience that when you are in a passive mode, in a passive listening mode, it becomes much harder to focus, much harder than when you are in class. People mentioned the lack of interactivity, and people complained about increased screen time. We had 2 or 3 students who actually specifically reported that due to the increased screen time, they had to actually go and buy new glasses, which we find kind of funny. Some people had increased stress levels and increased fatigue. They reported that they were actually receiving more homework than what they were used to, and it was hard for them to actually cope with that. Of course, inevitably, any collaborative assignments were heavily impacted because it was much harder to collaborate. A lot of people, we will see that further on, reported that following the lectures was hard because also they didn't have good internet connection. So if the signal was consistently dropping, it was hard to focus on what was being said. A few students actually mentioned that when you are in such a condition, it's hard to get participation grades because it takes a lot more effort to actually voice your opinion. And of course, some international students reported that they had to be awake during the night because of the time difference, because they traveled back to their home countries. So you can definitely see that it had impacted our students in a positive and in a negative manner. Now, if we move on, when we started the survey, the 4 of us had identified some aspects that we thought might be worth specifically ask our students if they felt something changed with respect to that. And these were access to facilities, peer collaborations, course material presentation, course content, student communication with instructors, or any communication of course-related information. So we specifically asked our students to what extent did any of the following things were impacted. And we see that a lot of our students, and if we move actually to the next slide, we'll see that regardless of country, here we follow the same questions, but each country has a different color. In all 3 countries that we're analyzing, students agreed that access to facilities and equipment was a big problem. It was a big stop to their learning experience, as well as peer-to-peer collaboration with their classmates. For the rest of the responses, you'll see mixed feelings, and there is a very small, if you go all the way down to the answers, to the no, a very small portion of the students that said that none of these was impacted by quarantine. We're talking less than 20% of the responses said that all these were fine. I did not witness any change. I could follow the courses perfectly fine. Moving on to the next question. We had to ask people during all this time, did you feel the need to purchase anything, to buy any equipment to actually be able to follow the courses better? And that was, did you feel the need? Not necessarily that you went ahead and purchased them, but did you at some point thought that it would have been much better if I had this, I should buy this? And here students are kind of divided with a 51% saying yes. But what is actually interesting is if we go to the next slide, the follow-up question, which was one more click, what did they feel the need to actually buy? As we would expect, they wanted to buy headphones, like hardware, audio hardware. So headphones, audio interfaces, etc. So any audio hardware related, microphones, keyboards. Some people needed to also purchase licenses to software they would most likely get access to if they had access to facilities, same as with hardware equipment. People felt the need to upgrade their personal computers, and some mentioned that they thought of buying, or they bought a tablet to actually have two screens, one to follow the homework and one to actually follow the course as it was happening. A lot of people actually made it clear that they have taken measures to upgrade their Wi-Fi connections, their internet connections. Some mentioned actually is upgrading their contracts, other buying antennas, boosters, cables, etc. Anything they could to actually get a better connection to the online courses. Of course, webcams, second monitors, microphones for teleconferencing were there. But interestingly enough, quite a few people specifically mentioned that they have bought or they thought of buying furniture or other equipment that they would help with their posture, like comfortable ergonomic chairs and ergonomic mics and a proper desk to do their homework, because they were in front of a computer during their whole day, which we did not expect to see in the questionnaire. Another thing that we wanted to see in terms of the strategies that goes under what strategies did the students employ to survive the 3 semesters of quarantine. Actually the 2, because the first hit us halfway through. And the question was, did this situation affected the way you register for classes? Did you select your classes based on what you thought it would be more viable for you? And there the responses varied a lot. I did not put them in the slides because they really depend on actually the structure and on the curriculum of each university. And actually, if they were freshmen, sophomore, senior students. So freshman students, they did not even have any strategies because it was their first semester. They didn't know any better. People who were about to graduate, they did whatever they could to graduate. But also for universities that had, a more open-ended program in terms of registering for courses, we would see responses of people saying, I registered for more courses because I felt like now I had the time to deal with the homework, or I did that in the fall semester and actually I regretted it. And in the spring semester, I registered for much fewer classes because I realized I couldn't keep up with the homework. So not only some people had certain strategies, but they actually updated them as they went on from semester to semester. They were trying different things. The final slide that I want to share with you is the ultimate question. How do students envision their post-pandemic learning experience? The question was, which of the three methods, hybrid, in-person, or remote, do you feel is more conducive to your learning? And then we actually see that most people either prefer hybrid or in-person classes. 44% for hybrid, 43% for in-person. And we have only a 12% asking for remote classes to become the norm from now on. And I think, do I have one more slide or no? No, I think I stop here. Yes. So, and the interesting thing is that from the responses that we got from Canada and Greece, you see the yellow color, which corresponds to hybrid teaching. Students actually preferred hybrid teaching, whereas in the US, based on the questionnaires we have so far, they would actually prefer in-person teaching. So there is this difference there, and it's the strongest one we have among the questions that we started analyzing. And we need to look into the actual responses of the students to figure out what was the cause of it. What remains clear, though, is regardless of countries, regardless of type of program, regardless of which course you're actually following, students were very, very, very strongly against remote teaching. I think it seems like they could use a break from that. So without further ado, we should move on to actually analyzing more of that questionnaire and the homework. So to Visda.
Thank you, Areti and Milena, for the great presentation of what we have done so far. I give you also a little bit overview again, like I kind of repeat what Milena and Areti said, but from a different perspective. Like let's take a look at like how in these different countries the timeline of the semesters were. We all had semesters between 13 to 15 weeks long, and the start and end points of them are here presented like kind of in a general way. But as you can see, in Japan, they started the semester a bit later originally because of Olympics, and then because of the pandemic, they had to kind of even postpone it a little bit more, and kind of had to catch up on Saturdays. In like US also, I am just representing how it was in like semester-based system, because there are also quarter-based universities and institutions. I'm not representing that here. We are just representing these 4 institutions that we have worked at, because that's where we have the data from. And if you look at the restrictions in these 4 different countries, it's also like, again, this is very general because the restrictions were on and off in all these countries. But in most places from mid-March, we had sort of a lockdown. And in some places it was a stricter lockdown, in some places less strict. I could not even show how it was because these on and offs were present everywhere. In some places, like I can say in Illinois, it was ongoing, but then people were less strict in general. Whereas like in Greece, people were really following the rules a lot more. Or in Canada, people follow the rules a lot more. In Japan, people follow the rules even when there are not rules. So even when the restrictions are lifted, people are still more careful. So these are things that influenced our teaching and learning a lot for the students. But I can say, for example, in United States, in Illinois, all of our colleges and universities closed, and they kicked out the students out of their dorm rooms in spring semester 2020, which was very difficult for a lot of students. And so we had like not just the challenges of like technology challenges, the students had also challenges with their living situation, and in Canada as well. So like the spring semester, it was like a really shut down. And in Canada, Greece, and US, we didn't even have access to the equipment in that semester anymore. So suddenly the students could not do any field recording. They didn't have access to equipment from the university. They couldn't borrow anything. Whereas in Japan, they still, with restrictions, they could go and get some equipment from university. They could still meet sometimes, for example, graduate students were still going to the university with the restrictions. Here Milena introduced briefly like what a wide range of classes we had. Here I show you again with details, with more details, with the number of students we had in each of these classes. But you can see we had classes from like more science and engineering, like acoustic classes, speech, audio, information classes, and then towards also like a lot of like creative classes, like musical instrument design, audio production classes. So we had a wide range of classes that had different needs. Some had more needs for like listening outside, doing sound walks in the cities which were in lockdown. So then this created some limitations for the students. On the other hand, for technology classes, we had some other limitations like limited access. And so could you please? Thank you. So some technical challenges that we gathered from the comments of the students in the surveys were like a lot of, as you saw in the data analysis that Areti showed also, that lack of facilities and equipments were a big challenge, especially for students of acoustics or students who had to do production work. Then the students had to have access to webcam for the Zoom classes. Many students did not have very good Wi-Fi. Many students had to move to their parents or to another living situation. So then they had to arrange new form of like internet. They had to pay for it. It was very difficult and challenging for a lot of them financially as well, because also many students work and pay with their work for their studies, and that was also very difficult. Some of them lost their jobs, and also like as I said, recording equipment for production, for also Milena's and one of my classes, we had a lot of like creative recording assignments that the quality of these recordings were substantially different because the students were recording material with their phones instead of having recording equipments because they didn't have access to it. So as I said, for acoustic classes, mainly like, which Areti had also a lot of like assignments that needed going to acoustic spaces, measurements. We also like integrated, Milena will talk about that more, like about our DB assignments that we tried to integrate in all of our classes. So it changed because the students could not go to concert halls to measure to do acoustic measurements. They were also not having, for a long time, they were not having proper access to even outdoors. So then it ended up becoming more like limited places. So like they were recording their roommates, or they were measuring the sound in their home environment. Also not having access to performance spaces. For example, I have a laptop orchestra, music instrument design classes. We did not have the performative aspects of these classes at all. So they turned into just like audio programming classes instead of, so the format of the classes totally changed. Instead of having performance in front of an audience, we had more networking performances, which was very novel at the beginning. In spring 2020, it was very exciting for everyone. Even in summer, there were a lot of performances. It lost its novelty a little bit because of Zoom fatigue, a lot of time spent on virtual performances. We noticed that like by spring 2021, fewer and fewer people participated in online performances, in also in even like presentations and so on. And also some students were like, we had some students who lived in places that were banned to come back. Then they couldn't, for example, they couldn't get their visa. Especially in North America, we had more problems with students. For example, in China, they couldn't come back because when they went in December 2020 for Christmas holidays, they couldn't come back. And they were like joining the classes at 4 a.m. Their time. It was very difficult for them to follow. They were behind firewalls, so sometimes they couldn't even join, like, for example, some Microsoft Teams classes. Like they had a lot of problems that were like in our extensive analysis, you will see a lot of those. These technical challenges created some specific challenges that like created some learning opportunity for students as well. So we cannot say it was just negative. A lot of students became very hands-on with networking protocols. With they could set up like a concert, or they could set up their whole signal flow with a whole sound system from home. So many of them learned a lot of skills that they wouldn't have done otherwise. Like if they come to the college or to the university facilities, everything is ready for them. Here they had to learn to use like also remote access, VPN, SSH, and also from a lot of students, we learned that they improved some of the other skills, like for example, audio programming skills that did not need in-person learning necessarily. The challenges that we could not do anything about, that like we tried our best, but also this lack of communication and physical interaction with each other, with the peers, with the instructors. In some institutions, even this is like the students are having less communication with their professors if they don't see them in person. Also, a lot of students complained about like they had to learn how to have a lot more self-discipline because there is no. I had sometimes students at 3 p.m. saying good morning in the class, so they had to self-organize themselves. Otherwise, it was difficult to follow a life online 24/7. And many students lost motivation by fall semester. They were still motivated, but by spring 2021, we saw a decline in student participation online. We saw the quality of the students' work was suffering a lot from Zoom fatigue, from being online so much. Yeah, I think I did talk about these. Okay, some more advantages from online learning. Sorry, I think I repeated myself here. There are some of these skills I mentioned in the earlier one, but like in general, they had some other advantages of like, for example, in Greece, the students, because they don't have to pay so much for school. It's not like in North America that they have to pay a lot to go to school. They could take more classes. They were even willing to, but that was again in fall 2020. In spring, that was not the case. But they started auditing more classes. They were motivated. Also, in all places in the comments of the students, we saw that many students were happy that they did not have the commute. So for many students, like commuting to school was a challenge, and like having no commute encouraged them to, like for some students, they could have more focus to stay, okay, they are staying in the class and then they can do their homework. They don't have to go back and forth to school. Even some students said they improved their typing, they improved their management skills, time management skills. In some seminars, in like advanced classes, the students were even more engaged in Milena's classes. Audio programming students got also like a lot better in programming, but not in other aspects of audio. I give it to Milena for talking about our assignments. Thank you.
Thank you, Visda. Thank you for this. So we also, in addition to this kind of quantitative survey and then the analysis of the qualitative and open-ended responses that Visda discussed, we also are interested in doing kind of meta-analysis of the assignments that we received, because some of the initial observations or some of the initial motivations for this collaboration between us was that we were getting assignments that were, kind of different than usual in very specific ways. So I'm going to talk about a little bit what those ways are, and I'll try to be brief so that we have time for discussion. We looked at some of the coordinated written assignments, reports on listening activities, that sort of thing, sound walking activities, technical assignments that, for example, had to do with measurements using either their phone to measure decibels or creating a sort of room acoustics. As you can see, the last two pictures on the right are from Areti's class. It's a room acoustics assignment, and Areti observed from the very beginning that suddenly she was getting students' rooms, and she was getting a very, very specific glimpse into the living situations, the lockdown situations of students, because they didn't have a chance to go out and do room acoustics in any interesting environments as they usually would. So they were doing all of that in their rooms. The first two pictures on the left are from one of my fall in-person sound walking decibel measurement activities. So it was still during lockdown, and you can't see this, but students are wearing masks here. And we kind of went into some alleys of downtown. We went into a mall, but with all the pandemic measures in place, and we created a little decibel data set, and then we discussed it after. So looking at I already talked about the coordinated assignments, but I'm just going to mention here that when presenting anecdotal findings, we haven't really done a very in-depth meta-analysis. So this is still mostly anecdotal because we're still collecting and we're still kind of analyzing. So one of the things that I want to highlight, I'm going to talk about audio projects, a little bit about decibel measurements, and then sound walking observations that we had from sound walking activities. So themes of the pandemic that seem to come up the most are, various concerns, whether they're health concerns, or concerns about anti-Asian racism, as like many students have talked about. It's an issue in North America specifically. Changes, shifts, changes in lifestyle and everyday life, features of online learning. So, students would sort of reflect on online learning. A lot of themes of mental health. And a year later, so from spring 2020, when the pandemic first hit, it was just before the students' fourth and final audio project for my class. So, depending on where we were, we kind of caught some of the initial pandemic impressions. And then a year later, the kinds of audio projects that we're getting have more themes of boredom, of like never-ending routine, the lockdown, home life, all of the kind of jokes and memes that have proliferated about lockdown. So I do want to play you a little example here, and I have turned my sound sharing back on, so I'm monitoring the chat. Somebody let me know if you can't hear it. But oops, there we go. So this assignment is from...
So your mom owns a small business.
2020,
and it's
March.
Entertainment based.
Yes.
Which is interesting because right now home entertainment is booming.
Yes.
Due to the circumstances, but live entertainment, theaters, they're kind of affected by those.
Yes.
Yeah, definitely in a negative way. And Regine, what does your mom do for a living?
My mom's a nurse at St. Paul's. Someone told me that it's where they're taking the patient, like the confirmed cases of like COVID-19. And also, my sister's diabetic, so if she gets sick, it's not good for her.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's really important to be social distancing right now.
Yes.
For
But
people who are
it's-
immunocompromised.
Yes. But also, I really want to leave my house so badly.
Yeah, really hard to like not get that mental stimulation. And on that note, do you notice that when you're doing online classes, your productivity is kind of like stunted?
Oh my god, my productivity is so bad. Oh, you know, what I've learned is that I hate online school.
Literally,
I cannot
online
do
school,
it.
I have no motivation for it at all.
Right.
It was so hard to get my final assignments and exams.
Now, if classes are still online in the winter time, like in September, I'm either not going to go back to school or I'll take like 1 or 2 classes.
Same.
But like my issue with that is, what am I gonna do all day?
Yeah.
But also, what am I doing all day right now? Avoiding school.
Oops. And then a year later, just want to play a little excerpt from like a year later. This is a final assignment just from this April or May, I should say. So basically, themes of a year later, themes, all of the sounds are recorded in the home, so we have this very much students working within the limitations and kind of turning inward, turning into like, what am I doing with my life? What is my environment like? And kind of reflecting on it. So this whole assignment was basically this set of sounds that kept repeating, but in a more time compressed way, to kind of make a point about the ongoing effect of like your mental health when your routine looks exactly the same and you're just doing like the same thing over and over and over. First world problems, but still, it's problems for students. And then, of course, in DB projects and various decibel and room acoustics projects, all the measurements and acoustics observations are happening at home, even in students' bedrooms. This is a quote from a class, from Areti's class. So suddenly a lot of the observations are from students' home lives. And it's kind of giving us as instructors this real like glimpse into students' pandemic life, into their home life, like the kind of glimpse that nobody wants, I don't want to look into their bedrooms on Zoom. It's like this forced intimacy that we've all had to endure. When students did venture outside during lockdowns, it ended up being very much in backyards and balconies, like very, very close to home. But in a way, it encouraged students to really spend time in their environment rather than commute to special places. So they kind of really explore their immediate surroundings. There were various technical limitations, as Visda and Areti both alluded to, them using their own phones for everything from decibel measurement to recording. But there were some opportunities where international students who weren't able to come back were bringing in their home spaces that were from different geographical environments into class. And sound walking was an interesting activity where when I took my students sound walking, I'm just going to briefly say this while you read the slide. My students had some interesting observations when in the fall of 2020, so the first like full-on online semester, regular semester, but it was some months after the pandemic had started, and there had been lockdown, like first the more extreme lockdown, and then, you know, slowly some things kind of got opened. And when students came downtown for a sound walk, they really talked a lot about what a clash this was with their normal experience, because a lot of them live in the suburbs and really quiet streets, and so coming downtown was like very disconcerting for them. And in some said it was exciting, like they were really excited to be in that kind of density and like life still happening. But as we listened very carefully during the sound walk, they also talked about how they were really, really aware of footsteps around them and the proximity of footsteps, proximity of people, because of the physical distancing, right? You're kind of, especially when you're in a more dense area and you're trying to do like the 2 meters apart thing, you become hyper aware of how close other people are to you. And so when we went on, you know, the silent sound walk, that's like students really over focused on that, the sounds of other people and the proximity. So with that, I want to actually wrap up now and lead us into our open discussion where, yes, we would love for you to unmute and have like even everyone can unmute and just kind of try to simulate as much of a panel experience as we can. And we'd love to hear other people's experiences from different countries or parts of the world. Did you notice in your own pedagogical practice or teaching practice or learning practice differences between early lockdown versus later on, or any specific challenges or advantages to online instruction, and in sound, in composition, in listening, and sonification? So with that, I'll stop sharing and we can come back to our kind of grid view and chatting about this.
So, yes.
Jordan has a question, I believe.
Yes.
Hi. Thank you. This was really great and super interesting, and a lot of it resonated with me both as a student and a teacher. So I just want to start by saying that. I'm curious if you could speak to collaboration and group projects and what you observed in terms of the students' ability to work with each other, because that was definitely a pain point among my students. So yeah, both good and bad in terms of collaboration opportunities.
I personally had to cut all collaborative assignments, so I don't have anything interesting to report other than I had to change my syllabus for that. But I don't know if Milena or Visda have anything to comment.
I didn't cut collaborative assignments, although of course, because my department made me you know, labor on really, really detailed safety plans. I had to convey, you know, if you are meeting, you know, that's, you know, you have to do it in a safe way. You know, I'm not sanctioning it. I'm not refusing it. You just, you know, do it. And I was surprised that I kind of expected that students will just work individually, that they'll really just want to take advantage of that home learning. But a number of students went out of their way to form collaborations, I would say. They really missed that, and we can see that in the survey. They really missed. Now, as to how well it worked, I mean, I can't speak to that, but it's more challenging, obviously. But it was something that they wanted to do.
I can speak about like the wide variety of it. That in freshman students in fall semester, I saw a huge interest in collaboration because they were students who came for the first time to the city. They wanted to work together, they wanted to see each other, and sometimes it was not possible with limitations, but we facilitated that they have enough uh, opportunities to do that, even if it's just in an online format. So if they were using online learning systems, we facilitated that they can communicate through these channels. But I should say with the more advanced students, I saw the collaborations declining because they were students who knew exactly what they want. For example, students towards graduation especially. And it was a lot harder, for example, if they are working on a hardware, software project. It's very difficult, especially for hardware projects. It was very difficult to collaborate. So even students were waiting for the parts to arrive from far away. So like it was not so easy to plan, manage their time. So I noticed that students preferred for some courses that I give the option to the students to do collaborations. I saw the decline in collaborations. So the interest was less. But for listening, I should say, in this semester, although the lockdowns were not lifted, the students were sick of staying at home. So they did some sound walks together, even without me asking them. And then they started recording sound together. So which was very refreshing to see because they preferred, even with their masks on, to go and explore different parts of the city together. So that was from my classes. I don't know if Hiroko, you want to say about how it was.
So I have assigned some final group projects to my graduate students who are not in the audio major, but studying audio from different majors. I think they managed pretty well. So the point was to allow the degree of freedom that what I said was, you do it and I'm not gonna watch it. So so essentially in that way they can choose the way of communication as they wish. Some groups prefer the text communication, some groups prefer like SNS based communication, some chose some Zoom meetings, and then it's really depending on the momentum of their groups, right? So so the choice of the communication tools is one thing. And then, so the other thing is to be careful about forming a group. So I had two experiences with that. With one class, we made the students to do some self-descriptions and then form the groups based on those descriptions so that people share the similar interests. For the other lecture, no, it's a hackathon class, and then that was we did presenting their project ideas, and then people get together for different ideas. And then we didn't even say we have to have a certain number of people in a group. So we allowed some students to work solo, while some students prefer to make a group of 3, or some form the group of 7, and so on. So the number of the students are pretty irregular across the groups, but I think that kind of flexibility is very important in this circumstance. So that's my input.
So what we get from here is a glimpse, and maybe Jordan, you can unmute yourself and tell us your experience instead of typing it. But what you got was a glimpse of the issues that we had when we started this project, where for a simple matter, how do we handle this? We see that not every country, every university handled it in a completely different way. In the US, they had a laptop orchestra class. My laptop orchestra class got canceled a week after the first lockdown. So it's actually very interesting to see how diverse these spaces of options of how to handle, from non-handling it at all to actually finding the best way to handle it. So I don't know,
That's
Jordan, if you want to
actually
share it.
Areti, I never realized this even in our conversations, but yeah, that's true. In Canada, like nothing got canceled. It's like we've got customers, they're paying money. We gotta deliver the goods. And so it was like everything was put on the instructors, like you figure it out. You figure out how to do it. We're not gonna cancel this. You figure out how to deliver, an online experience that is as good as or better than the in-person experience. So yeah, I mean, we all had to really learn a lot of technology very quickly and do a lot of research. I mean, I had a mental breakdown at the end of last summer just trying to, uh, organize my classes. But then I really want to emphasize the spring term was a kind of, or the fall term, the fall term of 2020 was kind of, some excitement over these new tools, but the spring term really this year really saw the fatigue. Like students were just fatigued of the breakout rooms, fatigued of, just Google Jamboards or whatever other, collaboration tools that we're constantly piling them on with. Like they were fatigued by the routine. Yeah.
Jordan, would you like to explain how your interaction design class went?
Sure. Yeah, I feel like similar to Hiroko, we just kind of had to expand the options because normally a group kind of capstone project is sort of the foundation of the class, and giving the option for students to work individually was sort of a last resort. But in the spring, we just found that we had to be a lot more flexible in terms of letting students work on their own if they needed to, letting students work together if they were into that. But group formation was really hard, and sort of cohort building and rapport building among the students, building classroom culture just remained a challenge. And so, yeah, that was just a struggle. But yeah, we had some teams super successful and other ones just completely like unable to communicate with each other, and we had to facilitate a lot of team communication.
Yeah, I agree. But this some successful group and some not so that successful group always exist even in a usual academic year, right?
For sure, for sure.
But did you also see any decline in the quality of the works, Jordan? Like in general?
I would say it mirrored when I taught the class 2 years ago. It was comparable. So yeah, I think they ended up producing good quality work. Definitely.
Thank you.
Yeah, does anyone have any more questions and or comments or things that you want to share? We certainly, this was a small summary of what we've discussed over the past year, just amongst ourselves.
And we would love to hear about like other institutions
Yeah,
all
yeah.
over the world. How did you handle it? What were the other challenges that we didn't see in our classes? Or what were the things you learned? Yeah, we all learned a lot, I guess.
And to be mindful of all of us, we have Zoom fatigue. If you prefer to ask us your question in Gathertown, which is a new tool to all of us, we will also be in the Q&A rooms. We get to pick the number, any number we want, because we are the only ones. Can be in Q&A room 1 because we're the only ones.
Yeah, why don't we just do Q&A room 1 then?
You can find us there and we can continue an informal conversation.
Yeah.
So one thing I remembered hearing Milena's description, I remember I decided to keep the class as low key as possible. So that was governmental request as well, that be mindful to the students who are not in the ideal situation. So please keep the class content as accessible possible. So we are requested to create the on-demand videos instead of doing Zoom sessions and so on. Then like things like group discussion on Zoom became impossible for some of the undergraduate classes. So that kind of attitude was quite different from different countries to countries, I think.
So we have a question in the panelist discussion box. I think Hiroko just started talking about it. That said, did we monitor? What did you say? Did you explore how different students' learning styles or disabilities affected their ability to participate in remote styles of teaching? And I would just make a small comment about it. As Hiroko said, every institution is bound by law, has its own regulations of how we handle people with special needs and disabilities in remote or in-person situations. The only difference that I saw was that these regulations had to shift momentarily during the past spring semester, the spring 2020 semester. But my experience was that the universities, at least in my case, based on what Hiroko said, I guess also in Japan, they caught up quickly, and there were different rules and different options for people in terms of participating in finals or handling assignments based on what they could or could not do. And in some cases, there were even regulations, in my case, for people who could actually prove in a manner that they did not have, for example, access to the internet, or they could not have for a prolonged time due to some technical difficulties, etc. So I think one thing that I won't say most, but a lot of institutions did good was they caught up really fast.
I really want to echo that. Yeah, the pandemic and the switch to online learning really created a lot of conversation in my institution about accessibility, I guess the accessibility of different materials. But I personally, like, this is a big thing for me, and I feel like I want to talk a lot more about, accessibility versus pedagogy, or versus like teaching, learning design. But so there was a lot of talk about how students, it was really helpful for different types of learners to have the recorded lecture. So, I don't even usually share my slides with my class, because I want them to be there and to pay attention. And, if there is a disability issue, I would then send slides to that student individually, but, I don't share anything normally. But suddenly I'm recording myself on Zoom and I'm sharing all the files. Then Zoom introduced the live transcript function, which was kind of celebrated a lot in my institution, and it kind of became the new normal, or certainly it became, like, okay, if you're recording lectures on PowerPoint, apparently a lot of presentation software now have a live captioning. So, always using captioning for it's, and it kind of expanded. I think the good thing was that it kind of expanded the definition of not so much disability, but just like accessibility. It shifted the conversation. It wasn't so much about accommodating disability as it was about, how do we make learning accessible to more and different kinds of learners, and people who would prefer to watch this later on their own time at 1.5 speed, the lecture, as opposed to be there in person. But yeah, I also, at the same time, I feel frustrated as an educator that, I'm torn about how effective or how well some of these accessibility measures are really, and I want to sit and reflect about, well, did this create a better learning experience really or not? And I see it's 9:03, so I'll stop, but.
Sorry, I just want to add to what you said. because this accessibility was to some extent like helpful for some students with disabilities, but it created an overwhelming amount of information for students in general. So like if you have 12 hours of video, it doesn't mean you gathered more knowledge. You have to still watch those 12 hours. And when you are interacting with the instructor, it's a very different experience than if you just sit and watch those videos. So that actually, for a lot of students, that made them have pay less attention. And I also, just like you, I do not allow recordings because of many reasons, because I also want the students to interact in the class. So when you have recording, fewer students interact. And so it was like I was trying to do that just for specific students. And again, that creates a lot of other challenges with it. So I stop here because this is a long discussion.
Yeah, let's take it to GatherTown.
Yeah, let's adjourn this one because we don't have a moderator, so we could be going for.
Oh yeah,
forever.
that's right. We were supposed to moderate ourselves.
So thank you all for joining us today, and we'll see you in GatherTown right away.